A thirsty lawn worker was denied a sip of water outside a mansion mocked as filthy while others laughed. But moments later, Keanu Reeves stepped out of a nearby film set, walked straight toward the gate, and said 6 words that silenced everyone. What he did next would change an entire city's heart. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The California sun hung heavy over Beverly Hills that afternoon, casting long shadows across manicured lawns and marble driveways. The Crane estate shimmered like glass, its white stone walls spotless, its fountains glistening in the heat. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and money. Behind the hedges, a man worked quietly. His name was Luis Ortega. His shirt clung to his back, soaked with sweat. Dust streaked his arms, and the skin on his neck had darkened from years beneath the sunday. The rhythmic hum of his old lawnmower was the only sound that reminded him he was still earning a living. He paused for a moment, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. The grass glittered with dew from the sprinkler system that wasn't meant for him. His small plastic water bottle sat on the edge of the curb, empty. He swallowed dryly, looked toward the mansion, and hesitated. The hose coiled beside the marble walkway looked so close, yet unreachable. He gathered his courage and walked to the gate, removing his cap respectfully. The security guard, a tall man in sunglasses, looked him up and down. Luis's voice was soft, polite, almost apologetic. "Sir, may I please have a little water? My bottle's empty, and I've been out here since morning." Before the guard could answer, a voice from the porch interrupted a younger man lounging in a chair with a glass of lemonade. Tyler Crane, the homeowner's son, barely in his 20s, clean white, sneakers, designer shorts, perfect hair. He didn't even glance at Luis before smirking. "The hose is for plants, not people." The words cut like glass. The guard chuckled quietly, unsure if he was supposed to laugh. A couple of neighbors walking their dogs slowed down, pretending not to stare. Luis stood frozen, his cap still in his hands. His lips moved as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, he nodded faintly, turned around, and walked back toward his mower. The sound of Tyler's laughter followed him across the yard, loud and hollow in the afternoon air. He felt the heat burning deeper now, not from the sun, but from humiliation. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the mower handle. His vision blurred for a moment, but he blinked it away. He couldn't afford pride. Not today, not ever. Pride didn't pay rent. Just down the street, across a low hedge separating the estate from another property, a small film crew was wrapping up a charity documentary. Cameras, boom mics, and lighting rigs lined the lawn. Among them stood Keanu Reeves, dressed simply in a faded gray shirt and jeans, drinking from a large jug of water. He was talking to a local volunteer when the sound of laughter caught his ear. He turned his head and saw Luis standing motionless by the mower, the guard smirking, the young man lounging above him. Keanu's face changed quiet, observant, his eyes narrowing slightly. He had seen enough of the world to recognize that kind of cruelty, the kind that hides behind jokes and privilege. He put down the water jug slowly, his gaze fixed on the scene across the fence. He didn't move at first. He watched. He listened. Then, without a word, he started walking. The air went still as Keanu Reeves stepped away from his film crew. His quiet presence drew eyes without effort. The production assistant tried to call after him, assuming he was headed for shade, but he didn't respond. His gaze stayed locked on the man by the mower and the young homeowner smirking from the porch. Keanu's boots crunched softly over the gravel as he crossed the narrow stretch between the two properties. The security guard straightened slightly, unsure how to react to a stranger walking toward the gate. But when Keanu drew close, the guard's posture softened in recognition. Everyone knew that face. Luis didn't notice him at first. His head was down, his hands on the mower handle. The engine sputtered, struggling against the thick grass. Keanu stopped a few feet away, taking in the cracked gloves, the sweat, the empty bottle lying on the curb. He looked up toward the porch where Tyler Crane was now scrolling through his phone, half bored, half proud. Keanu turned back to his crew. "Can I borrow the water jug?" he asked simply. The assistant blinked, then handed it over without question. He lifted the jug easily, the sunlight glinting off the clear plastic as he walked straight to Luis. Every eye in the yard followed him now. The sound of the mower died as Luis looked up, startled. Keanu smiled kindly, holding out the jug. "Here," he said, his tone steady but loud enough for all to hear. "These hands make this city greener." The words hung in the air. No one laughed this time. Luis hesitated, unsure if it was real. Then he accepted the jug with both hands. The first sip hit his throat like rain after drought. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. "Thank you, sir." Keanu shook his head. "No need for that. I just saw someone who deserved better." Across the yard, Tyler froze. The laughter that once filled the space was gone. Even the security guard looked down, pretending to adjust his watch. The few neighbors who had lingered near their driveways stared in silence. The humiliation that once belonged to Luis had shifted, landing squarely on those who mocked him. Keanu glanced briefly toward the porch, his expression calm but unyielding. There was no anger, just quiet conviction. He turned back to Luis. "You do good work," he said simply. "Don't let anyone make you feel small for it." Luis nodded, unable to stop the tears gathering in his eyes. He had worked in this city for 20 years, mowing lawns, trimming hedges, and pruning trees that shaded people who never remembered his name. No one had ever said words like that to him. As Keanu walked back toward his crew, the world seemed to pause. The cicadas hummed faintly in the background, and the sunlight shimmered on the jug still in Luis's hands. For the first time that day, he didn't feel invisible. Keanu returned to the film set, but his steps were slower now. His crew looked at him with quiet astonishment. No one said a word. The camera operator still had his lens raised, instinctively filming the scene that had just unfolded. It wasn't part of the documentary plan, but something about it felt too real to ignore. Across the hedge, Tyler stood frozen on the porch, his smirk gone. His phone hung limp in his hand. For the first time, he noticed how still everyone had become. The silence pressed on him heavier than the Sunday. He shifted uncomfortably, muttering something to the guard about getting back to work, but the words fell flat. The guard didn't move. Luis stood beside his mower, still clutching the jug of water. He stared at Keanu's back as the actor walked away. The moment felt unreal, as if the air itself had changed. He lifted his face toward the sky and blinked, letting the sunlight wash over him. Then, quietly, he went back to trimming the last edge of the lawn, this time with his head held a little higher. The director, standing behind a row of equipment, whispered, "Did that just happen?" Keanu nodded faintly without looking up. "Yeah," he said, "and it shouldn't have to." A few moments later, Luis's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his daughter, Maria. She had seen a short clip posted by one of the crew members on social media. In shaky footage, Keanu's calm voice echoed, "These hands make this city greener." The post was already spreading, the comments filling fast. People were writing things like, "Finally someone said it," and "This is what respect looks like." Luis didn't understand how big the moment was yet. All he felt was relief, a simple kindness after a long, harsh day. But for Keanu, something had shifted too. As he glanced back at Luis from across the hedge, he thought about all the invisible people who kept cities alive: the janitors, the construction crews, the gardeners, the cleaners, people who built beauty but were never invited to enjoy it. The sun began to set behind the hills, staining the sky with gold. Luis packed up his mower, his movements slower, gentler. When he turned for one last look at the mansion, he saw Tyler watching him from behind a curtain. Their eyes met briefly, then Tyler looked away. Keanu exhaled deeply, still holding that image in his mind. He knew this was just the beginning of something larger, something that needed to be seen. By the next morning, the video had spread faster than wildfire. A bystander who lived 2 houses down had uploaded it to social media, captioned simply, Keanu Reeves helps a worker humiliated at Beverly Hills mansion. Within hours, it hit hundreds of thousands of views. By noon, it had crossed 1 million. In the short clip, Keanu's calm words, "These hands make this city greener," echoed across the internet. The tone, the quiet authority, the message of respect, it all struck a chord. Thousands commented, saying it was the kind of decency missing in the world. Others praised the unnamed worker, calling him a symbol of dignity. But while the world celebrated, Luis Ortega sat in silence. He had no idea what to make of it. His old flip phone buzzed with messages from co-workers, cousins, and even neighbors he hadn't spoken to in years. They congratulated him, saying he was on TV. But Luis didn't feel famous. He felt anxious. Around mid-morning, his phone rang again, this time from his supervisor. The voice on the other end was flat and cold. "Luis, what happened yesterday?" "Mr. Crane isn't happy. You drew attention to the property," Luis tried to explain. "I didn't ask for attention, sir. I was just thirsty." The supervisor sighed. "Yeah, well, now the boss says it's bad for his image. He wants things quiet. We'll have to cut your hours for now, until this dies down." The call ended before Luis could reply. He sat in his small work truck, staring at the cracked steering wheel. Outside, the sun blazed again, relentless as ever. He ran his fingers through his hair, feeling the sweat, the dirt, and something heavier, a mix of disbelief and humiliation. Across town, the mansion owner Arthur Crane sat in his sleek office, reading an article about the viral clip. A powerful real estate developer known for his charm and wealth, Arthur was furious. Not at Keanu, at the fact that his property was in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. "This is bad press," he snapped to his assistant. "People think we mistreat workers. Do you know how much that hurts my reputation?" The assistant nodded nervously. "Should I release a statement?" Arthur waved a hand. "No, just handle it quietly. Cut ties with the landscaper. I don't want him or his crew here again." He looked out the window, sipping his espresso, convincing himself he was protecting his image. But somewhere deep down, the memory of his own father, a construction worker who once came home covered in dust, began to stir. He quickly pushed it away. Meanwhile, Keanu's team gathered in a small trailer outside the set. His publicist had already received dozens of requests for comment. "Everyone wants you to say something," she said. "The video's huge." Keanu leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "No statements," he said quietly. "Let his dignity speak louder than my name." The decision not to comment surprised everyone on Keanu's team. His assistant, Laura Miller, leaned forward with concern. "Keanu, you're trending everywhere. Hashtags, interviews, even morning shows are running the clip. People are asking for a quote. Don't you think saying something could help?" Keanu shook his head slowly. "It's not about me. The moment wasn't a performance. It was a correction." Laura exhaled. She had worked with him long enough to know he meant every word. When he saw wrong, he acted. Quietly, simply, without expecting anything back. But now, this small act of kindness had ignited a cultural conversation he never intended. Across Los Angeles, news channels replayed the footage. Commentators debated what it meant. Some called it a symbol of humility in a shallow city. Others said it revealed a larger problem, that the people who build, clean, and maintain the world are often treated as if they don't exist. Back in East LA, Luis sat in his modest apartment, scrolling through old news clips on his daughter's phone. His hands, still rough from work, trembled as he watched himself on screen next to Keanu Reeves. He didn't recognize the man in the video. The quiet gardener turned into a viral hero. Maria, 16, sat beside him at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and notebooks. Her smile was bright, her energy infectious. "Dad, you're famous," she said with a laugh. "Look, millions of views. Everyone's talking about you." Luis managed a small smile. "No, mija. I'm just a man who needed water." She frowned. "But what they did to you, it wasn't right." He looked down at his calloused palms, tracing the cracks and scars that told his story. "The world has many people like me, We don't ask for much, just respect. The apartment was small, barely 2 rooms, but it carried warmth. A framed photo of Luis's late wife sat on the shelf, her smile forever frozen in a purpose. The moment before illness took her, a potted plant by the window leaned toward the sunlight. It was the only thing Luis watered for himself. When night came, he sat outside on the small balcony, listening to the faint hum of traffic. He couldn't stop thinking about Keanu's words, how simple they were, yet how deeply they had landed. Across the city, Keanu lay awake in his hotel suite. He replayed the moment again in his mind, the arrogance in Tyler's laughter, the helpless silence of the worker, the heat shimmering off the white walls of privilege. It wasn't just about one man denied water. It was about every unseen worker he had met on movie sets, every janitor sweeping floors after midnight, every cook leaving through the back door unseen. He whispered into the quiet room, "This city worships money, but forgets the hands that keep it alive." Outside his window, the lights of Los Angeles glowed faintly, like stars pretending to be something brighter. The next morning, the noise had only grown louder. News vans parked outside the mansion, reporters waiting for comments from the Crane family. The front gate that once turned away a thirsty worker now stood guarded by cameras and microphones. Tyler stayed inside, scrolling endlessly through online backlash. Every clip replayed his laugh. Every comment called him heartless. His stomach twisted every time he saw his own smirk frozen on screen. Arthur Crane paced his office again. "This is out of control," he muttered. "A simple misunderstanding blown into a scandal." He turned to his PR consultant, who was visibly nervous. "People are calling for a statement," she said carefully. "You could turn this around by addressing the workers' treatment and apologizing publicly." Arthur scoffed. Apologize? For what? Giving someone a job? But even as he said it, the words rang hollow. Deep down, he remembered his father kneeling in dust at a construction site, hands cracked and raw from laying bricks. His father had always said, "Work is work, no matter who's watching." Arthur had built his empire trying to escape that life, but now he realized how far he'd drifted from it. In a quiet neighborhood miles away, Luis returned from a half-day of work. He had fewer lawns to mow. Now clients canceled politely, saying they wanted to avoid publicity. He didn't argue. He just nodded and kept moving. When he got home, Maria met him at the door holding 2 grocery bags. "I got us something special tonight," she said proudly. "We're celebrating." Luis smiled gently, taking the bags from her hands. "Celebrating what?" She grinned. "That the world finally saw you, Dad. The real you." He chuckled softly and shook his head. "The world doesn't need to see me, mija. I just want to keep working." She looked at him, her eyes full of both admiration and sadness. "You don't see it, do you? What you did changed people." Luis didn't respond. He looked at his rough hands again and thought of Keanu's calm expression at the mansion gate. He thought of the silence that followed those 6 words. Maybe, he wondered, kindness could echo longer than cruelty. At that same moment, Keanu was back on set, pretending to focus on a new scene, but his mind was elsewhere. Between takes, he stared at the dusty gloves hanging from a crewman's belt and thought again of Luis. Not the viral clip, not the headlines, the man himself. He turned to Laura and said quietly, "This isn't the end of his story, it's the beginning." The morning after the video reached its peak, Luis rose before dawn as always. His alarm clock blinked 4:45 a.m. He stretched his sore back, slipped on his worn boots, and quietly brewed coffee so as not to wake Maria. The smell filled their small apartment, mixing with the faint scent of soil and detergent. The world was still asleep outside, but this was his favorite hour, silent, honest, and unpretentious. While sipping from a chipped mug, his mind drifted back to another morning long ago in a different world. He was 19, standing on his father's small plot of land outside Guadalajara. The soil there was rich and red, the kind that clung to your boots and stained them with pride. His father, old but strong, taught him how to plant with intention. "You don't just dig, Luis," he used to say. "You listen. The earth speaks if you let it." Luis had grown up believing that hard work was a language understood everywhere. But when the great storm hit, everything changed. The wind tore through their crops, flooding the fields, drowning years of effort in one night. His father's land was left barren. With no harvest and no savings, Luis made a decision that would change everything. He crossed the border in search of work. He remembered the first year vividly. Long bus rides, shared rooms with strangers, blistered hands, and the ache of missing home. But he endured, because endurance was what his family had always known. Every week, he sent what little money he could to Guadalajara, writing short letters to his parents in his careful handwriting. "Tell Mama, the rain can't wash away what we've planted inside." Years passed. Luis found steady work with a landscaping company in Los Angeles. He became known for his precision, the clean edges of lawns, the way he shaped hedges into perfect symmetry. But he never lost his old habits. He still talked to the plants softly as he worked, humming old songs from home. Some coworkers laughed, calling him the whispering gardener. But his clients never complained. Their gardens flourished. Then came the hardest loss of all. His wife Elena, who had joined him after 5 long years apart, fell ill. She fought bravely, but the illness took her before Maria's 10th birthday. Luis still remembered holding his daughter that night as she asked, "Why didn't God make her better?" He had no answer, only the promise that he would raise Maria strong, kind, and unbroken. Now, 16 years later, Maria was his reason for everything. She had her mother's eyes and her father's quiet resilience. And though life was modest, it was theirs, rooted in effort, watered by love, and sustained by hope. Luis finished his coffee and headed to work just as the first light touched the horizon. The city was waking up delivery trucks, early buses, the echo of sprinklers hitting concrete. He drove his rusted pickup down Whittier Boulevard, glancing at the worn photo of Maria taped to the dashboard. Her graduation cap was tilted sideways, her grin wide and unguarded. That picture kept him moving. As traffic slowed near downtown, he thought again of the life he had built from scratch. 20 years in the United States had taught him the value of silence, the power of patience, and the pain of invisibility. He had seen people avert their eyes when he pushed his mower past expensive storefronts. He had seen families turn away when he asked for water on hot days. Yet through it all, he kept humming the same tune his father once sang while planting corn back home. That afternoon, Maria came home early from school. Her energy filled their small apartment like sunlight. "Dad," she called from the door. "You're not going to believe this." She held up her phone, the screen glowing with a message. "Mr. Reeves wants to meet you." Luis looked up from cleaning his boots. "What are you talking about?" She grinned, unable to contain herself. "Someone from his team gave me a message on social media. They said he's organizing a tree planting event downtown this weekend, and he asked if you'd come help." Luis frowned slightly, wiping his hands on a towel. "That can't be real. Why would a man like him want to meet me?" "Because you inspired people," she said softly. "Dad, the video made everyone talk about how unfair that moment was. He wants you there, with him. You have to go." He hesitated. The idea felt surreal. He wasn't used to being noticed, let alone invited. His life had always been about doing, not being seen doing. Fame made him uncomfortable. It felt fragile, unpredictable, like sunlight breaking through clouds. It could disappear as quickly as it came. But Maria's face was glowing with hope. "You always tell me to take chances," she reminded him. "Maybe this is yours." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "I tell you that, yes, but I didn't mean for me." She crossed her arms, teasing. "Too bad. I already said yes for you." He sighed, but couldn't hide the smile tugging at his lips. "You and your mother," he said, "always deciding for me." As the evening deepened, Luis sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. He imagined meeting Keanu Reeves, the man who had stood up for him when no one else did. He didn't know what he would say, but he knew he wanted to thank him. Still, a question lingered in his mind, quiet but persistent. What if he wasn't worthy of the attention? What if the world expected something from him he couldn't give? That night, as Maria went to bed, Luis sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the small note she had left beside his coffee cup. In her neat handwriting, it said, "You've already made a difference, even if you don't see it." The words stayed with him long after the lights went out. He thought of the journey that had carried him here, the sweat, the exhaustion, the loneliness. Yet, even through hardship, he had found purpose in the soil beneath his hands. He had always told Maria that the earth doesn't judge. It gives to anyone willing to care for it. "Every leaf listens," he had told her once, while teaching her how to plant flowers on their balcony. She had laughed and said, "Then I'll tell them secrets." Now, years later, those words returned to him. Maybe kindness worked the same way, quiet, unseen, but still growing somewhere deep. The next morning, Luis left early for work again. Though his mind was restless, he kept replaying Maria's excitement and the strange idea that Keanu Reeves wanted to see him. Every time he thought about it, he shook his head in disbelief. "He's a movie star," he murmured. "I'm just a gardener." At a job site that day, a few of his co-workers teased him gently about the video. "Hey, celebrity gardener," one joked. Luis smiled awkwardly, but didn't answer. He just pushed the mower forward, letting the engine's hum drown out the attention. Still, somewhere inside, he felt a quiet pride. Not because of the fame, but because the world had witnessed something simple. A moment where decency had outweighed status. When he got home that evening, Maria was already waiting by the door, holding her phone to her chest. "Dad, it's real," she said breathlessly. "They called. Mr. Reeves's assistant wants to confirm your attendance at the event this weekend." Luis froze for a moment. "They called you?" She nodded quickly. "They'll send an address tomorrow. You're officially invited." He rubbed the back of his neck, trying to find the right words. "What will I even say to him?" "Just be yourself," Maria said softly. "That's why he noticed you in the first place." Luis looked at her, his heart swelling with both pride and worry. He didn't understand why his life had suddenly become the center of a story, but he knew one thing for certain. He had to show up, not for fame, not for recognition, but for the same reason he woke up before dawn every day. Because good work, done with honest hands, was always worth showing up for. The next afternoon was quiet in Luis's apartment. The radio played softly in the kitchen, an old Spanish song that reminded him of home. He was trimming a few potted plants on the balcony when Maria called out from the living room. "Dad, your phone's ringing!" He wiped his hands and stepped inside, expecting a client or one of his co-workers. The screen showed an unfamiliar number with a Los Angeles area code. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello, this is Luis," he said carefully. "Mr. Ortega?" A calm voice replied. "This is Keanu Reeves." Luis froze, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Who?" A soft chuckle came through the line. "Keanu Reeves, I just wanted to thank you for letting me be part of your day. I saw how you handled that moment at the mansion. You didn't argue or lose your temper. You stood with dignity. I could learn from that." For a moment, Luis forgot how to breathe. He glanced at Maria, who was staring at him curiously. He managed to whisper, "Mr. Reeves, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Keanu said kindly. "I wanted to invite you to something. This weekend, we're planting trees in a public park downtown. It's a reforestation project for low-income neighborhoods. I'd be honored if you joined us." Luis rubbed his forehead, struggling to find words. "I'm just a gardener, sir. I don't know if I belong there." Keanu's tone was warm but firm. "You belong wherever good work is being done. You've already shown what that looks like." Luis looked down at his rough hands and smiled faintly. "Then I'll be there." When he hung up, Maria nearly exploded with excitement. "You talked to him? The real Keanu Reeves?" Luis nodded slowly, still processing it. "He invited me to plant trees. Imagine that, a Hollywood star asking a gardener for help." Maria threw her arms around him. "You deserve it, Dad. Finally, someone sees what I see every day." That evening, Luis sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker like fireflies. For once, he allowed himself to feel something close to pride. Not for the fame, but for being recognized for what he was, not what he wasn't. Across town, however, a very different conversation was taking place. Inside the Crane family's mansion, Arthur Crane was reading yet another article about the viral incident. His jaw tightened. The public's sympathy was entirely on Luis's side, and his son's behavior was now a public embarrassment. Tyler sat across from him, scrolling on his phone. "They're making memes now," he muttered. "All this over some lawn guy?" Arthur lowered the paper slowly. "That lawn guy has more honor than most of our guests." Tyler frowned. "Are you taking his side?" Arthur's tone sharpened. "I'm taking the side of decency, something you might want to learn." Tyler tossed his phone onto the marble counter with a scowl. "You're acting like I'm the villain here, Dad. It was a joke." "The guy asked for water from the hose. You think that's a crime?" Arthur folded his arms, his expression hard. "You humiliated someone who was working. That's not a joke. That's arrogance." Tyler leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So now, everyone's a hero if Keanu Reeves likes them? You've got the world crying over a gardener, and somehow I'm the bad guy for laughing." Arthur stood silently for a moment, studying his son. Then he said, Tyler hesitated, caught off guard. "He worked in construction, right?" Arthur nodded. "He built houses like this one. He came home every night covered in dust, with hands cracked from laying bricks. He used to tell me, 'Don't ever forget the people who build your success.' But I did forget, and it took a video of you mocking someone like him to remind me." Tyler's expression faltered. He shifted in his chair, avoiding his father's gaze. Arthur continued, his voice lower now. "You think this is about Keanu Reeves or social media? No, it's about respect. You don't earn that with money, Tyler. You earn it by seeing others as human beings." Tyler didn't reply. He stood, muttering, "Whatever," before leaving the room. Arthur watched him go, the sound of the door closing echoing through the hallway. He rubbed his temples, a dull ache forming behind his eyes. Meanwhile, in a very different part of the city, Luis was finishing his shift. The sun dipped low, painting the sky orange as he parked his old truck outside a small grocery store. He walked through the aisles, picking up rice, beans, and a few apples for Maria. At the checkout, the cashier recognized him from the video. "Hey," she said, smiling shyly. "You're that man Mr. Reeves helped, right?" Luis looked startled. "Yes, I suppose I am." The cashier grinned. "That was beautiful. My father's a janitor. He said you reminded him of himself. Thank you for standing tall." Luis nodded, touched. "I didn't stand tall. I just didn't bend." When he returned home, Maria was at the table making a sign that read, "Planting Hope." She held it up proudly. "For the event." He laughed softly, taking a seat beside her. "You really think I'll fit in there?" "You'll fit anywhere people care about the earth," she said confidently. Luis smiled, thinking of Keanu's calm voice. Maybe this invitation wasn't about belonging. Maybe it was about being seen. Saturday morning arrived with a soft haze over the city. The sky was pale gold, the streets damp from a night of light rain. Luis woke earlier than usual, his nerves tingling. He ironed his only clean button-up shirt, the one he saved for special occasions, and packed his work gloves in a small canvas bag. Maria made him a cup of coffee and kissed his cheek before he left. "You'll be great," she said. He drove slowly across the city, his old truck rattling on every bump. When he reached the park, he was stunned. Dozens of volunteers were already there. Families, students, environmental groups, and in the middle of it all stood Keanu Reeves, wearing jeans, boots, and a faded blue shirt. He looked like just another volunteer, chatting easily with everyone. Luis hesitated near the edge of the lot, suddenly feeling small among so many confident faces. Then Keanu noticed him. His expression brightened instantly. He waved. "Luis, you made it!" Luis smiled nervously as Keanu walked over and extended his hand. "I'm glad you came," Keanu said warmly. "You didn't have to, but you did. That means something." Luis shook his hand firmly. "You invited me. I couldn't say no." Keanu laughed softly. "Then let's get to work." They joined the others, digging small holes, planting saplings, and covering the roots with rich soil. Luis showed a few younger volunteers how to check soil moisture and how deep to bury the roots so the trees could breathe. Before long, people started listening to his quiet instructions. His experience guided them better than any manual could. Keanu stood beside him, smiling. "You see, you're a teacher without even trying." Luis shook his head modestly. "I'm just doing what I know." As the morning went on, photographers and reporters began arriving, drawn by Keanu's presence. Yet, instead of crowding him, their cameras gradually shifted toward Luis. They saw what Keanu saw, a man who didn't seek attention, but commanded it through quiet integrity. Across town, Tyler Crane sat in his car, scrolling through another flood of posts. One video showed Keanu and Luis side by side, both covered in dirt, laughing as they planted a young oak tree. The caption read, "The gardener who inspired Hollywood to dig deeper." Tyler slammed his phone down, frustration boiling inside him. His father's words replayed in his mind. "That lawn guy has more honor than most of our guests." He hated how true it sounded. For the first time, guilt began to surface beneath his anger, but pride still kept him silent. As the event wound down, Keanu turned to Luis, wiping sweat from his brow. "You did great today," he said. "This city needs more hands like yours." Luis looked around at the rows of young trees swaying in the breeze. "No," he said quietly. "It just needs more hearts that care." The morning air was crisp and full of promise. A line of shovels leaned against a wooden fence, their handles gleaming faintly in the early sunlight. The park had once been a neglected patch of dirt surrounded by faded buildings, but today it was alive with movement volunteers laughing, children carrying saplings, and the low hum of optimism in the air. Keanu Reeves arrived quietly, wearing jeans, work gloves, and a faded flannel shirt. He blended easily into the crowd, offering smiles and handshakes to those who greeted him. Despite his fame, he looked entirely at home in the dirt, kneeling to help unload small trees from a truck. When Luis Ortega's old pickup pulled into the lot, his heart thumped faster. He parked at the far end, watching for a moment before stepping out. He felt out of place among the neatly dressed volunteers, unsure where to stand. His clothes were clean but worn, his boots scuffed, his gloves patched at the seams. Keanu noticed him immediately. He stood, brushed dirt from his knees, and walked across the grass. "You made it," he said warmly, handing Luis a new pair of work gloves. "Let's make this city breathe again." Luis nodded, managing a shy smile. "Yes, sir." "No, sir," Keanu said with a grin. "Just Keanu." The two men began side by side, digging shallow holes and setting young oak and magnolia saplings in place. Luis worked quietly at first, measuring the soil depth with practiced precision. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost meditative. The volunteers nearby began to notice. A young college student asked, "Is that deep enough?" Luis crouched beside her, showing her how to loosen the soil at the bottom. "The roots need room to move," he said. "If they can't breathe, the tree won't grow strong." More people gathered around, listening. Keanu smiled, stepping back to let Luis lead. "You're hearing from a man who understands the earth better than anyone I know," he said. Laughter rippled through the group, breaking the tension. The crowd began asking Luis for tips, how to tell if soil was too dry, how to protect young trees from wind. Bit by bit, his shyness faded. His hands, steady and sure, did what they had done for decades, guided life from the ground up. Cameras from local news outlets appeared along the park's edge. They zoomed in on the unlikely sight, the world-famous actor and the humble gardener working side by side. Keanu didn't pose or speak to the press. He just worked, his clothes streaked with dirt, matching Luis's pace. When one reporter asked for a quote, Keanu simply pointed to Luis and said, "Talk to him. He's the one who knows how to build things that last." Luis's eyes widened. He shook his head, but the sincerity in Keanu's expression left him speechless. By mid-morning, the park buzzed with activity. Volunteers moved in rhythm, digging holes, unwrapping saplings, and watering young roots. Luis found himself surrounded by curious faces, eager to learn from him. His nervousness had melted away, replaced by quiet focus. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. He showed a group of teenagers how to measure the right space between each tree. If they're too close, he explained, they'll fight each other for sunlight. Give them room to grow, like people. The kids nodded, hanging on every word. Keanu worked nearby, smiling as he listened. That's wisdom right there, he said. Room to grow. A light breeze rustled the leaves of the newly planted trees. Someone handed Luis a microphone to address the volunteers, but he waved it away gently. I don't need that, he said, his voice carrying naturally. Just listen with your eyes. He knelt and placed a small tree into the ground. This one, he said softly, will outlive all of us if we care for it. He pressed the soil down with his palms, his movements deliberate and steady. Around him, everyone followed, repeating his motions like a quiet ritual. Reporters began taking photos, but Keanu subtly raised his hand, signaling them to stop. Let's keep this about the work, he said, not the pictures. The volunteers nodded, understanding the tone he set. There was no glamour here, no celebrity posturing, just honest labor. Nearby, an older woman in a wheelchair approached with her granddaughter. Mr. Reeves, she called, thank you for doing this in our neighborhood. We've been waiting for something like this for years. Keanu smiled and shook her hand. Luis is the one to thank, he said. He reminded me that beauty starts from the ground up. The woman turned to Luis, her eyes warm. You've given us more than trees, sir. You've given us hope. Luis felt his throat tighten. He simply nodded, unable to find words. As noon approached, the once barren park began to change. Rows of young trees stood proudly under the sunlight, each one anchored by a small wooden stake with a volunteer's name written on it. Luis noticed a young boy struggling to tie his stake properly and knelt beside him. You see this knot? He said, guiding the child's hands. It holds firm, but still lets the tree breathe. The boy smiled shyly. Like you and Mr. Reeves, right? Luis chuckled. Maybe something like that. Keanu watched from a few feet away, his face relaxed but thoughtful. He could see what was happening, how one man's humility had drawn everyone together more powerfully than any speech could. By the time they stopped for lunch, people were shaking Luis's hand, thanking him for what he had taught them. He didn't notice the cameras anymore. He only saw the trees, standing tall in the soil, swaying gently like they were already alive with gratitude. The afternoon sun softened into gold as the last of the saplings went into the ground. Luis straightened his back, wiping sweat from his brow. Around him, laughter and conversation filled the park. Children were chasing each other between the trees, their shoes kicking up dust. Volunteers stood in small groups, taking pictures and sharing stories. The once empty space now looked alive, a place reborn from effort and care. Keanu approached with 2 bottles of water, handing one to Luis. You've worked harder than all of us, he said with an easy smile. Luis shook his head. I'm used to it. Still, Keanu replied, glancing at the rows of young trees. You didn't just plant these. You taught everyone how to respect the ground they walk on. Luis looked around, humbled. I never thought anyone would listen. They listened, Keanu said softly. And they'll remember. The wind carried the faint sound of applause from across the park. The local news crews had set up near a shaded bench, broadcasting live segments about the event. Their cameras focused on Luis, whose quiet manner contrasted sharply with the spectacle around him. He stood still, watching a little girl gently water a tree with a small metal can. A few feet away, Keanu spoke with the event organizers, but his eyes kept drifting back toward Luis. Something about the man's composure reminded him of the groundedness the world had lost, the quiet pride of people who found meaning in labor, not recognition. Among the crowd, a familiar face lingered at a distance. Tyler Crane. He wore a cap, pulled low, and sunglasses, hoping not to be recognized. He had told himself he came just to see what all the fuss was about, but deep down he knew why he was there. As he watched Luis laugh softly with a group of children, something inside him shifted. He had mocked this man, called him filthy, and now here he was, surrounded by respect, inspiring strangers. The sight stirred something uncomfortable, a blend of guilt and admiration. Arthur Crane had been right. That gardener did have more honor than most people he knew. When the event ended, the volunteers gathered for a group photo. Keanu motioned for Luis to stand beside him. Luis hesitated, shy as ever, but Keanu insisted. "You're part of this story now," he said. The photo captured two men from different worlds, united by dirt-stained gloves and shared purpose. The image would soon spread everywhere, but neither of them knew that yet. For now, they simply stood side by side, the trees behind them swaying in the gentle Los Angeles wind. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds of Keanu Reeves's modest Los Angeles apartment. Despite the warmth of the day, his mind felt restless. The tree planting event had ended only hours ago, but the images kept replaying in his thoughts: Luis kneeling in the soil, children following his every instruction, the look of peace on the gardener's face as he watered the last sapling. His phone buzzed continuously. Messages from his team poured in links to articles, social media mentions, and photos already trending online. One headline read, "Hollywood star works with humble gardener who inspired millions." Another showed Luis's picture beside his own, captioned, "The hands that heal the earth, Laura Miller." His longtime assistant arrived with coffee and her laptop in hand. "You're everywhere, Keanu," she said, setting the cup on his table. "That footage from yesterday has gone global. People love it. You and Luis are being called symbols of humility." Keanu rubbed his forehead. "Symbols," he repeated quietly. "That's what worries me. He's not a symbol, he's a man. I don't want people turning this into a spectacle." Laura looked at him thoughtfully. "It's already out there. The clip of you handing him the gloves, the way he spoke to those kids, it's resonating with people. Maybe that's not a bad thing." Keanu sighed. "Maybe not, but I don't want his dignity to get lost in the noise." Across town, Luis was waking up to the same flood of attention. His daughter Maria sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through videos on her phone. Every other post was about him. Photos of him beside Keanu, articles about his story, even interviews with people who had volunteered at the event. "Dad," Maria said, barely able to contain her excitement, "people are calling you the Green Guardian of LA. Isn't that amazing?" Luis blinked, confused. "The what?" She laughed. "It's what they're calling you. They say you inspired Keanu Reeves to start a movement." Luis frowned gently. "I didn't inspire anyone, mija. I just planted trees." Maria shook her head. "That's exactly why they love you." He gave a small smile but didn't answer. He didn't understand why the world suddenly cared so much. For years he'd done the same work alone, unnoticed and uncelebrated. The attention felt unreal, like a dream he wasn't sure he wanted to wake from. Still, there was a quiet pride beneath his hesitation. He thought of Keanu, the way he had looked at him not as a star above, but as an equal beside him. That memory made Luis feel something he hadn't felt in a long time seen. By midday, the internet storm had only grown stronger. News outlets played the footage on repeat, each offering their own take on the story. Some focused on Keanu's humility, others on Luis's quiet dignity. Across social media, people shared clips of Luis explaining how to plant trees, quoting his simple line, "If the roots can't breathe, nothing grows strong." It became a metaphor for life itself. In a small diner near downtown, Luis sat quietly eating lunch while glancing at the television mounted above the counter. His own face appeared on the screen again. The host was saying, "A Hollywood actor and an everyday worker showed us what respect looks like." The customers in the diner applauded softly. Luis lowered his gaze and smiled shyly, not wanting anyone to notice him. But a few did. An older man at the counter turned to him. "You're the gardener from the video, aren't you?" Luis hesitated. "Yes, sir." The man reached out a hand, shaking it firmly. "You reminded us that good work matters." Thank you. Luis nodded, humbled. I just do my job. As he left the diner, a group of kids waved from a booth. One of them shouted, "Mr. Green Hands." Luis chuckled under his breath. The nickname embarrassed him, but it made him smile. Meanwhile, in a high-rise office overlooking the city, Arthur Crane was scrolling through the same headlines that now seemed impossible to avoid. He saw Luis's face beside his own company's mansion in every article. The contrast was glaring: the humble worker and the rich employer. He leaned back in his chair, feeling a sting of regret he didn't want to admit. His assistant knocked on the door. "Sir," a reporter called again. "They want a statement about your son's behavior during the incident." Arthur sighed heavily. "Tell them no comment." After a long pause, he added, "And canceled Tyler's meeting this afternoon. I need to talk to him." Across town, Tyler was sitting in his car watching one of the event videos on his phone. He couldn't look away from the sight of Luis teaching volunteers how to plant properly, surrounded by smiles and gratitude. Each clip chipped away at his pride. He had laughed at that man once, thinking he was above him, and now he could see how wrong he'd been. Arthur called, "You've seen it, haven't you?" Tyler's tone was defensive. "Yeah, I saw it." "You should go talk to him," Arthur said simply. Tyler scoffed. "What am I supposed to say?" "The truth," Arthur replied. "That you were wrong." Tyler didn't answer. He just looked out the car window, watching people carrying potted plants from a local nursery, their laughter echoing through the air. It struck him how much joy could come from something as simple as planting a tree. He wasn't ready to admit it aloud, but a small part of him wanted to be better. Later that evening, Keanu sat with Laura Miller and the documentary team in a small editing room. They were reviewing raw footage from the tree planting event. On the screen, Luis could be seen guiding a child's hands as they covered a sapling with soil. The way he moved, steady, calm, unhurried, captured something no script could ever create. Laura leaned forward. "This is gold, Keanu. If we add this segment to the documentary, it'll give the project heart. People will see what real compassion looks like." Keanu watched silently for a moment, then shook his head. "Let's not make it about me, or even the event, just about him and the work. No narration, no voiceover. Let it speak for itself." The editor nodded slowly. "You sure? Your name helps it reach more people." Keanu smiled faintly. "Then they'll find him through me. That's enough." While they talked, across the city, Luis and Maria sat on their couch watching a local news segment about the day. The reporter said, "In a city often divided by status, this story reminds us that humility still plants deeper roots than pride." Maria turned to her father with bright eyes. "They're calling you a hero, Dad." Luis laughed quietly. "Heroes wear capes. I just wear gloves." She smiled. "Maybe that's why you're different." As the segment ended, Luis's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a reporter or a coworker. It was a message from Keanu. It read, "You did something beautiful today. Thank you for letting me be part of it." Luis read the text twice before responding. "Thank you for seeing me." "People don't always do that." Keanu's reply came almost instantly. "They will now." For a long moment, Luis sat in silence. He looked out the window at the small plant on their balcony, its leaves catching the faint city glow. Maria had named it Hope when they first brought it home. Tonight, it seemed to stand a little taller. At the same time, Tyler Crane stood in his father's study, his hands buried in his pockets. Arthur looked at him quietly, waiting. Finally, Tyler spoke. "I saw the video again. He's nothing like I thought." Arthur nodded slowly. "That's because you weren't looking the first time." Tyler exhaled, guilt washing over him. "I want to fix it, Dad." "Then do it," Arthur said. "Start with an apology." The silence between them felt heavy but honest. Outside the window, the wind carried the scent of fresh soil from the park downtown, the same park where a humble gardener had quietly changed the course of many lives. By the end of the week, the story had become impossible to escape. Every television station replayed the same clip: Keanu Reeves handing a jug of water to Luis Ortega. the quiet gardener who never asked for attention. Anchors debated endlessly about what it meant: celebrity humility, social inequality, the dignity of labor. Talk shows featured panels dissecting every gesture, every word. Some praised Keanu's kindness. Others turned it into another headline. Luis watched it all from his small living room, uneasy and overwhelmed. Maria sat beside him, her laptop open, scrolling through social media posts filled with his picture. Some messages were supportive, full of gratitude and admiration, but others were cruel, accusing him of using Keanu's fame to chase attention. "Dad," Maria said softly, "maybe you should do one interview just to tell your side." Luis shook his head. "No, mija. The more you talk, the more they twist your words. I don't need to explain kindness. But they're saying things that aren't true," she insisted. "They're calling you a liar." He gave a faint smile, the kind that comes from exhaustion. "Let them. I just plant grass." Across town, news vans gathered outside Keanu's production office. Reporters shouted questions through the gates. "Mr. Reeves, are you supporting the workers' cause? Will you release a statement?" Keanu's team ignored them, keeping the gates closed. Inside, Laura Miller watched the noise unfold from the second-floor window. "It's getting worse," she said. "Every outlet's running with a different version of the story. Some are even calling it staged." Keanu was sitting at a small table, flipping through a notebook filled with handwritten thoughts. His face was calm, but his jaw was tight. "We can't feed the fire," he said. "Truth doesn't need volume. It just needs patience." Laura frowned. "But what about Luis? He's the one taking all the hits." Keanu nodded slowly. "Then we'll protect him another way." That evening, he sent a handwritten note to Luis's apartment. It arrived the next morning, folded neatly inside a small envelope with no return address. When Luis opened it, his hands trembled slightly as he read the message. "Your silence says more than any press conference ever could. Keep standing tall." No signature, just those words. But Luis knew who it was from. He smiled faintly and tucked the note inside his wallet, right next to an old photograph of Maria and her mother. Still, outside that quiet apartment, the world continued to spin louder and faster. And somewhere in that noise, another voice was about to add fuel to the fire. Arthur Crane's office was tense. His public relations team sat around the conference table, their laptops open, the words "Crane Family Statement" glowing on every screen. The scandal had reached levels no one expected. Photos of the mansion were plastered across news sites, and the Crane name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Arthur stood by the window, his shoulders heavy. "I said no statement," he muttered. "It'll only keep the story alive." One of the PR managers cleared her throat. "Sir, with respect, silence looks like guilt. People are asking why your family hasn't apologized." Arthur turned, his voice firm. "Because an apology written by a PR team means nothing. It has to come from the heart or not at all." The room fell silent. But outside that office, Tyler Crane was doing something very different. Anger simmered beneath his frustration. Every time he saw Luis's name trending, it felt like a reminder of his own humiliation. He scrolled through comments calling him spoiled, heartless, privileged. One even read, "Imagine being rich enough to water your lawn but too cold to give a man a drink." His phone buzzed with a text from a friend. "Bro, the memes are everywhere. You need to fix this before it ruins." Tyler clenched his jaw. "Fix it? Fine. I'll fix it." That night, using a fake account, he posted a comment on a gossip forum claiming that the entire encounter between Keanu and Luis had been staged to promote an upcoming environmental project. He added fabricated details: how the gardener had been paid to act humble, how cameras were conveniently rolling when it happened. Within hours, the rumor spread like wildfire. By morning, headlines screamed, "Was the viral kindness video a setup?" And Gardner's story may not be what it seems. Talk show hosts debated whether Luis had orchestrated everything for attention. When Maria saw the rumors online, she burst into tears. "Dad, they're calling you a fraud," she said, shoving her phone toward him. "They think you lied." Luis read the articles in silence, his heart heavy. "It doesn't matter," he said softly. "The truth doesn't need to shout. Maria's voice cracked. "But you're losing clients, Dad. People canceled again today. They think you made it all up." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand gently. "Then I'll find new clients. Don't cry, Mija. It's only work." But later that night, when she had gone to bed, he sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at his cracked phone screen. His stomach ached from worry. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. He had worked his whole life to be invisible, and now, somehow, visibility was destroying him. Across town, Keanu was reading the same headlines. He scrolled through pages of speculation, his expression unreadable. When Laura called, her voice was tight with frustration. "We have to respond. They're twisting everything." Keanu's answer was calm but firm. "Then we'll show them the full story." The following day dawned gray and heavy with tension. Luis woke to the sound of his phone buzzing nonstop. Messages poured in from friends, co-workers, even strangers, some offering support, others spitting venom. His stomach twisted as he read one comment calling him a liar in work boots. Another said, "Actors and gardeners, all pretending for views." Maria sat quietly at the table, her breakfast untouched. "Why do people hate us for telling the truth?" she whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong." Luis reached for her hand, his eyes weary. "The world doesn't always believe simple stories," he said. "They think everything needs a reason or a reward, but kindness doesn't." She wiped her eyes, angry now. "Well, maybe Keanu should say something. He could stop this in one interview." Luis shook his head. "He already did more than enough. I'll be fine." But inside, he wasn't fine at all. The phone calls from clients had slowed to nothing. One homeowner left a message saying they were moving in a different direction. Another texted simply, "Please don't come next week." Across town, Keanu stood in the editing studio again, watching raw footage from the day of the tree planting. Every frame of Luis showed quiet integrity. His posture, his tone, his patience with the children. The world was attacking a man who had done nothing but work with honesty. Laura Miller entered, holding her phone. "It's spreading faster, Keanu. They're even saying the water jug was part of a marketing plan. This is insane." Keanu exhaled slowly, thinking. "Then we give them the truth. Not an interview, not a headline, the real footage." Laura hesitated. "You mean the uncut clip?" "Yes," Keanu said firmly. "Everything. From the moment I walked off the set to when he thanked me. No edits, no voiceover, no spin. Just the truth as it happened." Laura nodded, already dialing the production team. "You know, once we release it, the story changes direction completely." "That's the point," Keanu replied. "He deserves his dignity back." That night, while the city slept, Keanu's team uploaded the full video to his official account. The caption was short and simple. "No one staged kindness, we just lived it." Luis didn't see it right away, but when he woke before dawn and checked his phone, the notifications flooded in. The same people who had doubted him were now apologizing, sharing the clip with hashtags that read number respect hands and number truth in work. Maria rushed to his side, smiling through tears. "They believe you, Dad." Finally, Luis exhaled deeply, relief washing over him. "No," he said softly. "They believe in kindness again." The following weekend, Keanu Reeves organized another event at the same park where he and Luis had first planted trees. This time, it wasn't just a volunteer project. It was a gathering for the community workers, families, and children from all walks of life. Word had spread quickly after the release of the uncut video. People wanted to meet the quiet gardener whose dignity had silenced the noise of the internet. By noon, the park was filled with folding chairs, rows of saplings, and banners that read, "Hands that build hope." The air buzzed with conversation, laughter, and music from a local band playing near the fountain. News cameras circled the area, expecting another celebrity photo opportunity. But Keanu had something very different planned. When he stepped onto the small wooden stage, the applause came instantly. He lifted a hand, signaling for quiet. The microphone squeaked slightly before his calm voice filled the space. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "You've heard the story by now. You've seen the videos. But what you saw wasn't about me. It was about a man named Luis Ortega." He paused, letting the name settle over the crowd. A man who didn't curse when he was insulted. A man who didn't fight back with anger. A man who stood with dignity when the world looked down on him. He reminded me, and maybe reminded all of us, that the measure of a man isn't his wealth, but the worth of his work. The crowd listened in perfect silence. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for a moment. Keanu continued, "When I saw him that day, I didn't see a worker. I saw a craftsman, someone who gives beauty and life to this city every single day. People like him build the places we live in, care for the trees we pass, and make this city breathe. Yet we walk past them as if they're invisible." He looked out over the audience. "Today, we're changing that." A ripple of applause rose from the back rows. Keanu smiled, then turned slightly toward the right side of the stage. "Luis, would you join me up here?" There was a murmur as people turned to see where he was. Luis stood near the edge of the crowd, Maria gripping his hand tightly. His chest tightened with nerves. "I don't belong up there," he whispered. Maria smiled. "You belong exactly there." With hesitant steps, Luis walked toward the stage. Keanu reached down and offered his hand, pulling him up gently. The crowd erupted in applause. Luis stood awkwardly for a moment, looking at the sea of faces. The sunlight caught his weathered features, his humble posture, and the faint tremor in his hands. But when Keanu stepped aside, nodding for him to speak, something inside him steadied. He approached the microphone. The applause quieted again. Luis looked at the crowd, his heart pounding. The park that once seemed so big now felt small, intimate, like a living room full of strangers waiting to hear his story. He took a deep breath and began. "I don't have fancy words," he said softly. "I'm not a rich man. I don't own much. But what I do have are hands that do good work." His voice was low, steady, and real. "For 20 years, I've been cutting grass, trimming trees, cleaning gardens that aren't mine. I've seen people smile when the work is done, but most of the time, no one looks at me at all." He paused, eyes glancing down at his calloused palms. "I used to think maybe that was how the world worked, that some people were meant to be seen and others were meant to stay invisible. But then, one day, someone saw me." He turned slightly toward Keanu. The crowd followed his gaze. "He didn't just give me water. He gave me something I'd forgotten. I had dignity." A hush spread through the park. Luis continued, his confidence growing with each word. "I've never cared about fame or stories on TV. I care about work that means something. Work that makes a city greener, cleaner, better for the children who will walk here one day." He stepped closer to the microphone. "Some people ask why I didn't fight back that day. The truth is, I've been fighting my whole life. Just not with anger, with effort. Every time I wake up before sunrise, every time I put my hands in the dirt, that's my way of fighting. And that's enough for me." The audience sat completely still, captured by his honesty. Even the reporters had lowered their cameras again. From the back of the crowd, Arthur Crane stood beside his son Tyler. Both were quiet, their faces unreadable. Arthur's eyes glistened faintly as he watched the man he had once dismissed as the help speak with more grace than anyone he'd ever met. Tyler shifted uneasily, guilt washing over him. When Luis spoke of being laughed at, Tyler's jaw clenched. It was his laughter that had started all this. His arrogance had caused the pain that now stood before him like a mirror. Luis looked out at the crowd again. "I'm not angry at anyone," he said, "because anger doesn't grow anything. Only care does. And if we want our cities, our homes, and our hearts to grow, we have to start treating each other like we treat the earth, with patience, respect, and love." Keanu nodded behind him, his eyes warm with admiration. Luis smiled faintly. "I'm just a gardener. I plant things. But maybe what I planted that day wasn't just a tree or a flower. Maybe it was a little hope. The crowd rose to its feet in a wave of applause that filled the park like wind through branches. People whistled, clapped, and cheered, chanting his name. Even Arthur wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. Tyler lowered his head, ashamed but moved. He whispered to his father, "He's right." Arthur placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, and now it's our turn to grow." On stage, Keanu placed a gentle hand on Luis's shoulder. "You reminded us all of something we forgot," he said. "That the most important work is the work done with heart." As the crowd's applause swelled again, Luis looked out at the rows of young trees swaying in the breeze and smiled. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. He felt rooted, like one of the very trees he had helped the world plant. By Monday morning, Luis's speech had become a phenomenon across the country. Clips from the community event flooded social media. His steady voice, his calloused hands gripping the microphone, his words about patience and care replayed in classrooms, news stations, and workplaces. People began quoting him online, calling him the gardener who taught a city how to grow again. News outlets reached out from all over, but Luis still refused most interviews. When a local high school invited him to speak about the dignity of work, he almost said no. Maria insisted. "Dad, they want to hear from you. You can show those students what real work looks like." Luis agreed reluctantly. On the day of the talk, he wore his cleanest shirt and stood nervously in front of the students. The principal introduced him as a man whose humility reminded us of what respect truly means. The students applauded politely. Luis stepped forward, cleared his throat, and began. "I don't know much about speeches," he said, "but I know what it means to care about something. When you take care of your work, even the smallest thing can mean something bigger." He lifted his rough hands, showing the lines and scars. "These aren't marks of shame. They're proof that what we do matters." The room went quiet. The young faces before him, some curious, some skeptical, began to soften. When he finished, the applause was louder than before, genuine and warm. One teacher came up to him afterward, saying, "You gave my students something I couldn't put in words. You gave them pride." In the days that followed, invitations poured in. A local landscapers union reached out, offering Luis an honorary role as a community advisor. They wanted him to speak at their annual gathering, where hundreds of workers would attend. Luis was stunned. "I'm no leader," he said when Maria told him about the offer. Maria smiled. "You are now." Meanwhile, across town, Keanu Reeves sat in his quiet office reviewing plans for a new project. He had spoken to the city council about expanding green spaces in underserved areas, but he wanted to make it personal. On his desk was a file titled the Luis Ortega Urban Tree Initiative. He signed the papers and handed them to Laura. "Let's get this started," he said. Laura looked at him curiously. "Should we tell him it's named after him?" Keanu shook his head. "No, let the trees tell him. He'll see them growing one day, and he'll know." That same afternoon, Tyler Crane sat alone in his room, watching Luis's speech again. The more he listened, the heavier his chest felt. Each word reminded him of who he didn't want to be, someone who measured worth in wealth, not in work. He turned off the video and sat in silence for a long time before finally standing. He knew what he had to do. That evening, Tyler drove to his father's office. The city lights shimmered on the windshield as he rehearsed what he wanted to say, but the words refused to form. When he finally stepped inside, Arthur Crane was sitting behind his desk, reading over documents for a new project. He looked up, surprised. "Tyler," he said cautiously, "I didn't expect you tonight." Tyler stood awkwardly in the doorway. "I needed to talk." Arthur gestured for him to sit. "Go on." For a moment, Tyler said nothing. He rubbed his hands together, staring at the floor. "I've been thinking a lot about that man, Luis." His voice was quiet but sincere. "I used to think people like him didn't matter. I thought money and power made you worth something. But after seeing what he said on that stage, I don't want to be that kind of man anymore." Arthur leaned back, listening intently. "Then don't be," he said gently. Tyler looked up. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," Arthur replied. "You start by admitting you were wrong, and then you try to make it right. Tyler hesitated. He'd never want to see me again. Arthur smiled faintly. You might be surprised. Good men forgive more easily than the world expects. Tyler nodded slowly, taking in his father's words. For the first time in a long while, he saw something different in Arthur's eyes, not disappointment, but quiet understanding. Later that night, Tyler sat in his car outside Luis's apartment complex. He didn't have the courage to go inside, but he wrote a short letter and left it under the front door. It read, I was the one who laughed at you. I was wrong. You taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn. Thank you. He drove away before anyone could see him. The next morning, Maria found the envelope on the floor. Dad, someone left you a letter. Luis opened it slowly, reading the words twice before folding it neatly. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked out the window toward the street where the trees they'd planted stood in a row, their leaves flickering in the sunlight. Everyone can grow, he murmured. Maria smiled softly, even the ones who started in the wrong soil. Across town, the effects of Luis's story continued to ripple outward. Local news stations covered the new Urban Tree Initiative, crediting Keanu Reeves for funding a project to provide free tree planting jobs for unemployed landscapers. Luis's name wasn't mentioned officially, but those who knew understood. Meanwhile, in their small apartment, Maria printed out dozens of online comments people had written beneath the video of her father's speech. She pinned them to the wall above their dining table, one by one. One read, I'll never ignore a worker again. Another said, he made me realize that decency doesn't need a camera. And another simply said, thank you, Luis, for showing my son what it means to be proud of what you do. When Luis came home that evening, he found her sitting at the table surrounded by pages. What's all this? He asked. Messages, Maria said, her eyes shining. From people you've inspired. Luis ran his fingertips over the papers, reading each one slowly. Some were from other workers, some from teachers, others from people he'd never met, all thanking him. He felt his throat tighten as he whispered, I don't believe it. Maria placed her hand over his. Believe it, Dad. You planted more than trees this time. Luis smiled, the weight of disbelief turning into quiet gratitude. For the first time, he truly understood kindness, once planted, never stopped growing. Late on a calm Saturday morning, Luis was tending to the small row of potted plants that lined his apartment balcony. The hum of the city blended with the gentle sound of birds fluttering near the railing. Maria was inside, painting signs for her school's new garden club, a project inspired by the park trees they'd planted with Keanu Reeves. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. Luis wiped his hands on his work pants and went to answer it. Standing outside were two men, Arthur Crane and his son Tyler. Their car, polished and elegant, stood out sharply against the weathered curb. Luis froze for a second, unsure what to expect. Arthur's expression was calm but uneasy, and Tyler looked nervous, his hands shoved into his pockets. Mr. Ortega, Arthur said carefully, I hope we're not intruding. We just wanted to talk. Luis hesitated, then nodded slowly. Of course. Please, come in. They stepped inside the small living room. The air smelled faintly of coffee and soil. Maria peeked out from the hallway, recognizing the visitors from the viral video. She quickly retreated to her room, leaving the three men alone. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension felt thick, but Tyler finally broke it. His voice trembled. I was wrong, he said. I shouldn't have treated you that way. That day, I thought I was being funny. I didn't realize how cruel it was. Luis looked at him quietly for a long moment. Tyler couldn't meet his gaze. He stared down at the floor, his voice growing softer. I've watched your speech 100 times. You said you've been fighting all your life with effort, not anger. I don't think I've ever fought for anything except myself. Luis took a deep breath. His tone was gentle. We all grow from the dirt we've walked on. Tyler lifted his eyes, confused. Luis smiled faintly. Mistakes are like soil. They make us messy. But if we learn from them, they can help something new grow. Tyler swallowed hard, his throat tight. Luis extended his hand slowly. "You don't owe me anything but honesty," he said. "That's the start of growth." Tyler took the hand firmly, his grip trembling. "Thank you," he whispered. Arthur exhaled deeply, as though he had been holding his breath since the door opened. "You didn't have to forgive him," he said softly. Luis shrugged. Forgiveness is water. Without it, nothing survives. Just then, a familiar voice came from the hallway behind them. "That's true." The three men turned to see Keanu Reeves standing at the doorway, holding a small box filled with saplings. His pickup truck was parked outside, its tailgate down. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, smiling. "I was dropping off these for Maria's school project." Luis blinked in surprise. "Mr. Reeves, you didn't have to come all the way here," Keanu grinned. "It's just Keanu, and I think I came at the right time." He glanced toward Luis and Tyler's handshake and nodded with quiet approval. "That's what change looks like." Keanu set the box of saplings on the table. "These little ones are for the school garden," he said. "Maria told me they were starting a project about sustainability. I figured a few more trees wouldn't hurt." Luis smiled with quiet gratitude. "She'll be so happy." "Thank you." Arthur stepped forward. "Studying the small trees. You grow them yourself?" he asked. Keanu nodded. "Started them a few months ago. They're ready for new soil now. Like people, they can't grow if they stay in the same pot forever." Arthur's gaze drifted toward his son, and the message was not lost on him. Tyler stood still, his eyes lowered. After a long pause, Arthur spoke softly. "Mr. Reeves, I owe you an apology too. For that day, for everything my son did, and for what I didn't do." Keanu met his eyes with calm understanding. "You don't owe me anything, Arthur. You owe it to yourself to change what comes next." Arthur nodded slowly, his voice rough with sincerity. "I want to make amends, but I don't know where to start." Keanu leaned against the table, crossing his arms. "Start by giving water to those who thirst," he said. "Not just for water, but for respect." Arthur absorbed the words. He nodded again, quietly repeating them under his breath, as if committing them to memory. "For respect," he whispered. Luis looked at him kindly. "You've already taken the first step. You came here." Tyler turned to Luis again. "I'll never forget what you said at that event," he said. "About fighting with effort, not anger. I want to live like that." Luis's face softened. "Then you already are. Change doesn't always look like a battle. Sometimes it's just a choice you make every morning." Maria peeked from her room, holding a small gardening notebook in her hand. When she saw the saplings, her eyes lit up. "Are those for us?" Keanu smiled warmly. "For your school, but you'll be the one taking care of them, right?" She nodded excitedly. "We'll plant them this week. I even wrote a plan how to space them and keep the soil moist." Keanu chuckled. "You sound just like your dad." Luis laughed softly, pride shining in his tired eyes. Arthur and Tyler watched the small exchange quietly. The scene was simple: a girl, her father, and a few trees. But something in it felt pure and healing. Arthur spoke again, his tone more resolved. "Luis, I'd like to hire your company for one of our new projects. A park restoration downtown, fair pay, full creative input. I want people to see what real work looks like." Luis hesitated. "That's very generous." Arthur smiled faintly. "It's not generosity. It's correction." Keanu looked from one man to the other and said gently, "Then let's call it growth." For a brief moment, they all stood together in the quiet apartment. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, landing across the box of saplings. The air felt lighter, like something wounded had begun to heal. The months that followed brought quiet transformation to Los Angeles. From small gestures and chance encounters, something lasting began to grow. The Crane family, once known only for luxury real estate, launched a new community initiative in partnership with city officials and local nonprofits. They called it the Green Hands Initiative, a program that provided stable employment for gardeners, landscapers, and maintenance crews who often went unnoticed. Arthur Crane stood at the press conference announcing the launch, his son Tyler at his side. Cameras flashed, but Arthur's words were deliberate and humble. "This program began with a mistake," he said. "A moment where our family forgot the value of honest work. Today, we begin again. The people who keep this city alive deserve respect, fair pay, and visibility." He looked toward the front row, where Luis Ortega sat quietly next to Maria. The crowd turned as Arthur continued. "This man reminded us of that truth, and he'll help guide this new chapter." Luis was introduced as the official ambassador of the program. The title startled him. At first, he had never imagined himself leading anything, but the role was simple: to teach, to share what he knew, to show others the dignity in the work that so often went unseen. Within weeks, the program took off. Abandoned parks were restored, sidewalks lined with new trees, and empty lots turned into community gardens. Luis traveled between sites, teaching young workers how to care for the land. He wore the same boots, carried the same gloves, and spoke with the same humility as always. "You don't just plant," he told them. "You nurture. That's the difference." He never used big words, but his message reached everyone. He told stories about how plants, like people, needed both sunlight and patience. The young workers admired him deeply, not because he was famous, but because he was real. One afternoon, while Luis was helping a group of teenagers plant new flowers along a school fence, Keanu Reeves appeared quietly at the edge of the crowd. Dressed casually with a baseball cap pulled low, he blended in easily, unnoticed by most. He watched as Luis guided a boy's hands through the soil, showing him how to anchor the roots gently. Laura Miller, standing beside Keanu, smiled. "You created something bigger than either of you could have planned." Keanu shook his head. "No," he said softly. "He did. I just passed him the water." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the children work. The laughter, the chatter, and the sound of shovels hitting the ground created a rhythm that felt hopeful. Keanu looked across the blooming garden and said quietly, "One small kindness can rewrite a city's heart." Over the next few months, the Green Hands Initiative became a symbol of renewal across Los Angeles. Murals appeared on park walls depicting hands lifting saplings, painted by local artists inspired by Luis's story. Community centers held monthly gatherings to honor workers who made visible differences in their neighborhoods. Reporters called it the quiet revolution of respect. Luis never got used to the attention, but he embraced his role. Every morning, he met new volunteers and students eager to learn. He would hand them gloves and say, "We start from the ground because that's where life begins." Maria often joined him after school, taking photos and helping coordinate the youth workshops. She had started a scholarship essay for her English class titled "The Hands That Built Hope." What began as a school assignment grew into something more. She wrote late into the night, her pen moving quickly across the paper as she described the lessons her father had unknowingly taught her. "My father taught me that work is love made visible," she wrote. "He showed me that dignity isn't something you wear, it's something you do. Every patch of grass, every tree, every piece of soil he's touched carries his patience, his care, and his faith and kindness." She described the morning Keanu Reeves handed him the water jug, how a single moment of compassion changed not just one man's day, but an entire city's way of seeing. "People didn't cheer because of fame," she continued. "They cheered because they recognized goodness when they saw it." When Maria's teacher read the essay, she was so moved that she submitted it to a national writing contest without telling her. A few weeks later, the essay went viral online. People from all over the country shared it, quoting her line, "Work is love made visible." Luis couldn't believe it when reporters started calling about his daughter's essay. He looked at her with a mix of pride and disbelief. "You wrote all that?" he asked. Maria nodded shyly. "It's what you taught me." He chuckled softly. "I never said those words so beautifully." "They were always there," she replied. "I just wrote them down." Meanwhile, Keanu continued to visit quietly, showing up unannounced at various Green Hands events. He preferred to blend into the crowd, no speeches, no cameras, just helping plant a few trees or loading supplies. When people recognized him, he only smiled and redirected the attention. "Talk to Luis," he would say. "He's the reason we're here." On one of those visits, Keanu found himself standing beneath a row of young trees, swaying in the evening breeze. Luis joined him, holding a cup of coffee, his hands still dirt-stained from the day's work. "They're growing fast," Keanu said. Luis nodded, looking at the trees. "Because we gave them room to grow." Keanu smiled at the familiar phrase. "You were right about that." Luis took a slow sip of coffee, glancing toward a group of kids playing in the distance. "It's not about fame or money. It's about what we leave behind." Keanu looked at him with quiet respect. "You've left more than you know." As the sun dipped below the skyline, the two men stood side by side, watching the city breathe through the green it had once forgotten. The noise of the world had faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves, a sound of change taking root. It was a quiet morning in early spring when Luis stepped out of his apartment, coffee in hand, ready to begin another day of work. The sky glowed with the soft gold of dawn, and the faint hum of city life had just begun to rise. He walked toward his old pickup truck parked by the curb, as he always did, but stopped suddenly. Something was different. The truck wasn't his old one. The faded green paint, the dents along the doors, and the worn-out tires were gone. In its place stood a brand-new work truck, sleek, sturdy, and painted the same shade of green his old one used to be before years of weather had dulled it. His name, L. Ortega Landscaping, was neatly printed on the door in white letters. Luis blinked, unsure if he was dreaming. He set his coffee on the hood and walked slowly around it. The back was fully equipped brand-new gardening tools, a shiny mower, fresh gloves, and a mounted water tank with a polished brass tap. There was even a small wooden plaque fixed above the rear bumper, carved with the words, "Keep planting goodness." He traced the letters with his fingers, his chest tightening. For a long moment, he just stood there, overcome. It wasn't just a truck. It was every small act of kindness returned to him in a language he understood. Work, purpose, care. Maria came running out the door moments later, her backpack bouncing. "Dad, what's that?" Luis turned, still dazed. I don't know," she gasped, circling the truck. "Is this yours?" He nodded slowly, still unsure how to answer. "It has my name on it." Maria opened the driver's door, her eyes widening at the interior. The seats were covered in soft brown leather. A small note sat on the dashboard, folded neatly. She picked it up and handed it to him. Luis unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was simple, written in blue ink. "Consider it borrowed from the earth. Keep planting goodness. K." Luis read it twice before sitting quietly on the step of the truck, his hands shaking slightly. Maria smiled through tears. "It's from Mr. Reeves, isn't it?" He nodded, unable to speak. The lump in his throat made it hard to breathe. "He didn't have to do this," he finally said. Maria looked at him lovingly. "He didn't do it because he had to. He did it because he wanted to." Luis smiled faintly. "That's the best kind of giving." He took out his phone and hesitated before dialing Keanu's number. When the actor answered, his tone was warm and calm, as if he'd been expecting the call. "Mr. Reeves," Luis began softly, "I found your surprise." Keanu chuckled. "Then it's not a surprise anymore," Luis laughed quietly. "It's too much." "No," Keanu said. "It's exactly enough." Luis sat in the driver's seat of the new truck, his fingers brushing over the steering wheel like it was something sacred. "You didn't have to do this for me," he said softly into the phone. "The work was already the gift." Keanu's voice on the other end was steady and kind. "You've given the city more than you realize, Luis. You reminded people that respect grows best when it's planted deep. Consider it borrowed from the earth. You're just keeping it in motion." Luis smiled, though his eyes filled with tears. "Then I'll take care of it like I take care of everything else, slowly and with love. That's all I could ask for," Keanu said. "And tell Maria I expect pictures of those school trees when they start shading the sidewalk." "She'll make sure of it," Luis promised. After they said goodbye, Luis sat for a long moment, the hum of early traffic in the distance blending with the beating of his heart. Then he turned the key. The engine started smoothly, with a soft, confident rumble. For a man who'd spent years coaxing life out of neglected soil, the sound felt like renewal. That weekend, Luis and Maria drove to the park, where everything had begun, the same place where Keanu had once handed him that water jug and said those words that changed everything. The rows of saplings they had planted together months earlier were now waist-high, leaves shimmering under the sunlight. The park was full of life. Children ran through the open fields. Families picnicked beneath the young trees, and volunteers from the Green Hands Initiative worked along the paths, planting flowers and pulling weeds. Maria carried a small backpack filled with snacks and a tiny watering can she insisted on bringing. "Just in case," she said, smiling. As they walked, several people greeted Luis. Some recognized him from his speech, others from the news stories that still floated around the internet, but none treated him like a celebrity. They spoke to him like an old friend, a neighbor who had made their world a little better. Luis and Maria reached the center of the park, where the first tree they had planted together still stood. Its branches were thin but strong, reaching upward with quiet determination. Luis knelt beside it, brushing the dirt at its base. The soil was rich and alive. He could see the tiny roots spreading, gripping the earth with purpose. Maria stood beside him. "Do you think it remembers us?" she asked. Luis looked up at the branches, swaying gently above them. "Every leaf remembers kindness," he said softly. "Every bit of care stays here, even when we're gone." They stayed for a while, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves, dappling the grass below. Luis felt something deep and peaceful settle in his chest, a sense that everything had come full circle. As they walked back toward their new truck, Maria slipped her hand into his. "Dad," she said quietly, "do you think one day we'll plant trees like this all over the world?" Luis smiled, glancing down at her. "One day? No, we already started." They reached the truck, the reflection of the park glimmering across its clean green surface. Luis placed a hand over the small plaque on the back, "Keep planting goodness." He whispered to himself, "And never stop." Months passed, and what began as a single act of kindness grew into something far larger than anyone had imagined. The Green Hands Initiative spread beyond Los Angeles. News outlets across the country covered how one gardener's dignity and one actor's compassion had sparked a quiet movement of respect for everyday workers. City after city launched their own versions, community programs that hired local gardeners, landscapers, and maintenance workers with fair pay, benefits, and public recognition. In San Diego, murals appeared showing hands lifting soil into sunlight. In Chicago, high school students planted urban gardens in honor of the initiative. In Phoenix, construction companies began offering apprenticeships to underprivileged youth, citing Luis Ortega's story as their inspiration. A journalist called it the movement that grew from water. Luis watched it all unfold with disbelief and quiet pride. He had never dreamed that his small life would echo so far. When he visited one of the new community parks in San Diego, volunteers greeted him with handshakes and smiles. One young man told him, "You gave us a reason to be proud of what we do. You showed us that our hands matter." Luis responded in his usual way, modest, kind, and sincere. "Every hand matters," he said simply. Meanwhile, Keanu continued supporting the initiative quietly. He avoided cameras and refused interviews, letting the spotlight remain on the workers themselves. He often donated equipment or showed up unannounced to plant a few trees, blending in among the volunteers. Whenever reporters tried to capture the story, he would step back, saying, "This isn't about me, it's about them." One morning, Luis received an invitation from the Los Angeles City Council. The letter was printed on elegant paper, embossed with a city seal. It read, "You are cordially invited to attend the dedication of the Ortega Community Park bench, honoring your contribution to the city's renewal." He sat for a long moment, staring at the letter in silence. Maria found him at the table and read it over his shoulder. "They named something after you, Dad," she said, hugging him tightly. Luis chuckled. "I don't need a name on a bench." Maria smiled. Maybe the city does. A week later, the ceremony took place at the same park where everything had started. Dozens of people gathered under clear blue skies: families, workers, volunteers, and city officials. Children played nearby, their laughter floating through the air. Cameras flashed, but the atmosphere felt genuine, not staged. It wasn't a celebration of fame. It was a celebration of humility, of work, of growth. Keanu stood quietly near the back, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. His presence understated but unmistakable. He wasn't there as a movie star. He was there as a friend. When the mayor stepped up to the podium, the crowd fell silent. "Today," she said, "we honor a man whose simple act of grace changed how we see one another." Luis Ortega reminded this city that true strength doesn't come from wealth or fame. It comes from the hands that build, clean, and nurture it. The mayor gestured toward the park's new centerpiece, a simple wooden bench placed beneath a broad oak tree that had been planted during the first community event. The sunlight filtered through its branches, casting gentle shadows across the engraved words on the backrest. "These hands make this city greener." A murmur spread through the crowd as people stepped forward to look at the inscription. Luis stood at the edge of the gathering, his breath catching slightly as he read the words he had spoken months ago without ever thinking they would one day be carved in stone. The mayor continued, "This bench will sit here for generations as a reminder that dignity is not earned by titles but by effort, compassion, and care. And that even one act of kindness can plant roots deep enough to change a city." Applause swept through the park. Cameras clicked, but Luis hardly noticed. He stepped closer to the bench, running his hand across the smooth wood. The engraving felt warm beneath his fingertips. Keanu moved quietly through the crowd until he was beside him. "It suits you," he said softly. Luis turned to him, his eyes glistening. "I never wanted recognition." Keanu nodded. "I know. That's why you deserve it." They stood in silence for a moment, watching families stroll past and children chase each other between the trees. The young saplings they had once planted were now sturdy and full, their roots settled deep. Life had taken hold in ways neither of them could have predicted. Nearby, Maria snapped photos with her phone, grinning. "Dad, you're going to be in the paper again," she called out playfully. Luis smiled. "Then make sure they get my good side this time." The crowd laughed, easing the formality of the moment. The mayor invited both Luis and Keanu to the front for a commemorative photo. As they stood together, the applause swelled again. But when the camera flashed, Keanu took a small step back, letting Luis stand alone in the frame. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. People clapped louder, recognizing the humility behind it. Afterward, as the crowd began to disperse, Arthur and Tyler Crane approached from across the field. Arthur extended his hand. "Luis, this park exists because you reminded us of something we'd forgotten. Thank you." Luis shook his hand warmly. "No, sir. It exists because people cared enough to listen." Tyler smiled sheepishly beside his father. "We've been working with the initiative, planting in a few neighborhoods on the west side. It's different now." "Feels right," Luis nodded. "That's good soil you're working in. Keep tending it." As the ceremony wound down, Keanu and Luis found themselves sitting on the bench together beneath the shade of the oak. The crowd noise faded to a hum, replaced by the sound of the breeze through the leaves. Keanu leaned back, his voice quiet. "You know, when I first saw you at that mansion, I didn't realize how much that moment would change me." Luis chuckled softly. "I didn't realize it would change the city." Their eyes met, no words needed after that. It was mutual understanding, silent respect between two men from different worlds who shared the same heart. The afternoon sunlight glowed on the green leaves above them, the bench beneath them, and the hundreds of hands around them still working, still planting, still growing. The following month, the Green Hands Initiative opened a new community project in East Los Angeles, a once vacant lot that was being transformed into a neighborhood garden. Rows of raised beds were lined up neatly, waiting to be filled with soil and seedlings. The sun was bright, and laughter carried through the air as volunteers of all ages arrived with gloves and shovels. Among them was Tyler Crane. He wore an old baseball cap and a plain gray shirt, almost unrecognizable from the sharply dressed young man who once stood behind a mansion gate. For the first time, he wasn't there to supervise or observe. He was there to work. When Luis saw him walking toward the tool shed, he smiled knowingly. "You came back," he said. Tyler nodded, a little shy. "I figured it's about time I learned what real work feels like." Luis handed him a shovel. "Then start with the soil. It's the best teacher." They worked side by side in the heat of the afternoon, spreading compost and turning the earth. Luis moved with steady grace, his years of experience evident in every motion. Tyler followed his lead, clumsy at first, but determined. After a while, Tyler wiped sweat from his forehead and said quietly, "It's strange. When I was younger, I used to look at guys like you and think this kind of work was beneath me." Luis kept digging. "And what do you think now?" Tyler glanced at his blistered hands. "Now I think it's harder than anything I've ever done, but it feels honest." Luis nodded. "The soil forgives when you learn to care for it. Just like people." The words hung in the air for a moment before Tyler spoke again. "I hurt people. You. My father. I can't undo that." Luis stopped and leaned on his shovel. "You don't undo pain. You grow something better in its place." Tyler met his eyes and smiled faintly. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," Luis said, "but it's not easy." Throughout the day, Tyler continued to work alongside the other gardeners, helping to plant flowers, pull weeds, and build garden boxes. No one treated him differently. They didn't see a rich man's son or a former antagonist. They saw a worker, a teammate, another pair of hands, making the city greener. At the end of the day, as the sun dipped low, Luis patted his shoulder. "You did good today." Tyler looked around at the rows of young plants glowing in the orange light. "I feel like I did something real." "You did," Luis said. "That's what matters." Meanwhile, Arthur Crane stood at the edge of the garden, watching his son from a distance. For the first time in years, pride filled his chest, not the kind born from business success, but the kind that comes from seeing growth in someone who was once lost. Later that week, Arthur announced his own project, a public garden named after his late father, Benjamin Crane, the man who had once laid bricks and built homes with his own hands. The announcement came quietly, without fanfare. The garden would be open to the public, free to all, and maintained by volunteers from the Green Hands Initiative. Arthur visited the site often, rolling up his sleeves to help plant shrubs and flowers. Every time he knelt in the dirt, he thought of his father, the calloused hands, the smell of fresh concrete, the lessons he hadn't appreciated until now. For the first time in decades, he felt like he was back where he belonged. A few weeks later, the Benjamin Crane Memorial Garden officially opened to the public. Rows of blooming flowers stretched along the walkways, and benches shaded by young oak trees offered places for rest and reflection. A small plaque near the entrance read, "In honor of the hands that built, the hearts that forgave, and the work that endures." Luis attended the opening with Maria, standing quietly among the crowd of volunteers and families. He wore his usual work clothes and his familiar sun-faded hat. Tyler was there too, greeting people and helping children plant flowers near the gate. Arthur arrived shortly after, dressed simply in a white shirt with his sleeves rolled up. The event was modest, just as Arthur wanted. No podium, no reporters, only community. He walked through the garden paths, nodding to the workers, stopping now and then to thank them personally. When he reached Luis, he smiled warmly. "You taught my son more in a few months than I could in years." Luis returned the smile. "We just planted a few lessons. He's the one doing the growing." Arthur chuckled softly. "I suppose we're all still growing." As the afternoon went on, Keanu Reeves arrived quietly, blending into the small crowd as always. Luis saw him near the entrance, carrying a paper cup of coffee. "You came," he said, shaking his hand. Keanu smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." He looked around at the rows of volunteers watering new plants, the children laughing, and the sight of Tyler hauling mulch beside a group of teenagers. Looks like something beautiful grew out of that day. Arthur joined them a moment later, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Mr. Reeves," he said sincerely, "I never thanked you properly for what you did. You reminded me where I came from, who my father really was." Keanu's response was simple. "It wasn't me. It was the truth in front of you." Arthur nodded, emotion tightening his voice. "Then I'm grateful I finally saw it." They stood together for a while, the three men who had once been strangers, connected now by humility, labor, and forgiveness. The garden around them buzzed with life. Bees hovered near the blossoms, the air rich with the scent of soil and hope. Luis watched Tyler working with a young boy, showing him how to plant properly. The boy pressed the soil too tightly, and Tyler gently loosened it with his fingers. "You see?" he said. "Give it space to breathe." Luis smiled, recognizing his own words reflected back at him. It was the greatest proof that real change had taken root. As the sun began to lower, Keanu walked along the path, stopping to look at the dedication plaque once more. The simple words about hands and hearts glowed in the golden light. He turned to Arthur. "Your father would have been proud of this." Arthur's eyes softened. "I hope so. He built homes. Now, in a way, we're building hearts." Keanu nodded quietly. "That's the best kind of construction." Luis, watching from a few feet away, placed his hand gently on a nearby sapling. "The soil forgives," he murmured to himself, "when you learn to care for it." The garden rustled softly in the wind, as if agreeing. Around them, laughter echoed, the sound of redemption blooming like spring itself, steady, quiet, and alive. The late afternoon sun poured over Los Angeles like warm honey. The city had its usual hum of traffic and chatter, but inside the park, there was peace. Keanu Reeves walked slowly along the winding path that curved through the heart of the Green Hands garden. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and damp soil. A gentle wind carried the faint laughter of children from the playground nearby. The oak trees planted months earlier now stretched proudly, their leaves flickering in the fading light. Beneath them, small flowers bloomed along the walking path, their colors catching the golden hour perfectly. Keanu stopped for a moment, running his hand along the top of a low hedge. His fingertips brushed over the dew clinging to the leaves. He had walked through countless parks in his life, but this one always felt different. It wasn't the design or the landscape. It was the story it carried. Every inch of soil here had been touched by compassion, humility, and growth. Every tree was a living memory of a moment that began with a jug of water and a man's dignity. As he walked, he passed a group of volunteers finishing up for the day. Some were teenagers, others retirees, all wearing green t-shirts that said, "Hands that build hope." They greeted him politely, some realizing who he was, others not. That anonymity comforted him. He didn't need to be recognized here. Near the park center, a small boy stood holding a watering can almost as big as he was. He struggled to tilt it over a flower bed. The water sloshed unevenly, soaking his shoes, but he kept trying. Keanu knelt beside him and steadied the can. "Easy there," he said kindly. The boy looked up, wide-eyed. "Thanks, mister." Keanu smiled. "You helping your family?" "My mom says I'm helping the earth," the boy replied proudly. "She says that's what green hands do." Keanu chuckled softly. "Then you're doing it right." The boy grinned, revealing a missing front tooth, and ran off toward his mother. Keanu watched him go, noticing the words printed across the back of the child's shirt. "Green hands. Every touch matters." He stood still, letting that phrase linger in his mind. It reminded him of Luis, how that man's quiet labor had inspired something bigger than either of them could have imagined. The thought brought a warmth to his chest. As he continued walking, he noticed a familiar wooden bench near the large oak. The same bench that bore Luis Ortega's words, carved in graceful script. "These hands make this city greener." The engraving had darkened slightly with time, polished by sunlight and the touch of countless people. Keanu sat down slowly, the bench creaking beneath his weight. From where he sat, He could see the park stretching out before him, families laughing, workers trimming plants, the fountain glistening in the late light. It was quiet, alive, and whole. For a while, he just sat there, in silence, his hands resting on his knees. The smell of earth, mixed with the scent of cut grass, grounding him in a way few places could. He thought of Luis, still working somewhere out there, with that gentle smile and quiet strength. He thought of Maria, whose words had captured millions of hearts. And he thought of every person who had joined in since, each one passing kindness forward like a seed carried by the wind. The sunlight began to sink lower, painting the park in hues of amber and rose. Keanu leaned back on the bench, eyes half closed, breathing in the peace around him. Somewhere nearby, a gardener turned off a hose, the faint click echoing in the distance. The gentle rhythm of nature had taken over, birds settling into branches, children's laughter fading into the hum of evening. A little boy passed by, tugging on his mother's hand. His small voice broke the quiet. "Mom, that's the man from the video," he said, pointing shyly. The woman smiled apologetically, but Keanu just lifted his hand and waved. The boy grinned, his green t-shirt bright against the dimming light. Across the front, it read, "Green Hands," the letters smudged with dirt and water stains. Keanu smiled to himself. That shirt alone said more than fame ever could. He remembered the day it all began, the arrogance, the laughter, the cruelty, and then the silence that followed. When he handed Luis that jug of water, he hadn't done it to be seen. He'd done it because he couldn't bear to watch decency ignored. Yet from that single moment, something unstoppable had bloomed. He rose from the bench and walked slowly toward the garden beds near the entrance. A group of workers were packing up their tools, laughing as they brushed soil from their gloves. Keanu nodded to them as he passed, his steps steady and unhurried. He recognized their satisfaction. It was the same peace that came from work done with purpose. At the edge of the garden stood a small plaque set in stone. It marked the first official Green Hands Initiative site, now expanded across countless neighborhoods. The inscription beneath the logo read, "From one act of kindness grew 1,000 hands of hope." Keanu touched the cool surface of the plaque and smiled faintly. He could almost hear Luis's voice in the back of his mind, calm and unpretentious. "Every leaf remembers kindness," the phrase echoed softly within him. He walked back to the bench where he had left his gloves, a worn pair, streaked with dirt from the last time he'd helped plant along the park's border. He picked them up, turning them over in his hands. The fabric smelled faintly of earth and cedar. "Fame fades," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible in the quiet park. "But kindness keeps growing." He placed the gloves neatly on the bench beside him, as if leaving behind a small part of the story. The sound of wind rustling through the trees filled the stillness. Somewhere in the distance, the little boy's laughter returned for a brief moment, before fading again. Keanu stood for one last look. The trees swayed gently, their branches touching the sky, as though bowing to something unseen. The grass rippled under the soft breeze, glowing like waves of green gold. This was no longer just a park. It was a living memory, a testament to compassion, work, and humanity. He turned to leave, walking slowly toward the path that led back to the city. Behind him, the bench waited quietly, the engraving catching the last light of the day. And beside it, the gloves remained symbols of effort, humility, and the timeless truth that what's planted in kindness never truly ends. The sun rose over Los Angeles, spilling light across the rows of trees that had once been seedlings. The park that started with one act of kindness now thrived with color and life. Birds nested in the branches, and early joggers moved quietly along the trails. The sound of water trickling from the fountains mixed with the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Near the edge of the park, Luis Ortega stood with a hose in his hands, watering the very trees he and Keanu Reeves had planted months ago. His movements were calm and deliberate, the same rhythm that had carried him through a lifetime of work. Drops of water shimmered in the sunlight, catching small rainbows before soaking into the soil. He looked up at the canopy overhead and smiled. The trees were taller now, strong and reaching. He could almost hear them breathing, alive and grateful. Behind him, Maria was sitting on a bench, flipping through the pages of a magazine. Her face lit up as she found the familiar headline, her own essay, printed in bold letters, "The Hands That Built Hope." It had won a statewide award, and the story had spread across schools and youth programs. Students from different cities had written letters to her, saying her words changed the way they saw the people who worked around them. She read one aloud to her father. "Dear Maria," it said, "my mom cleans offices at night. I used to be embarrassed about it. Now I'm proud. Thank you for helping me see her strength." Luis listened quietly, his smile deepening. "You've done good, mija." She looked up from the letter. "We both did, Dad." As they walked through the park, they passed a mural painted on a nearby wall, two hands planting a tree, surrounded by children's signatures. Across the top were the words, "Respect the hands that build." It had become a symbol of the movement that continued to grow. From the distance, Keanu walked toward them, his boots dusted with soil from another planting site. He waved as he approached, his expression easy and warm. "They're looking good," he said, nodding toward the trees. Luis chuckled. "I told you they'd remember the care." Keanu smiled. "They do, just like people." For a moment, the three of them stood together, taking in the park's beauty. The air was full of laughter and life, families picnicking, children racing along the grass, workers planting new flowers. It was a world reborn from compassion and humility, proof that change didn't need noise, only sincerity. Keanu's gaze drifted toward the city skyline in the distance. His voice softened, thoughtful. The strongest people are often the quietest, the ones who build, clean, plant, and repair. They don't demand attention. They deserve appreciation. Luis nodded, understanding the truth behind the words. That's the kind of strength that lasts. Keanu looked back at him. "And it started with you." Luis shook his head. "No, it started with water. You gave it, and the world grew from there." They shared a quiet smile. Two men from different worlds, bound by one small act that had changed everything. As the afternoon sun began to lower, the park shimmered with golden light. Keanu and Luis walked slowly along the path, the sound of laughter echoing behind them. They passed the bench that bore Luis's words. "These hands make this city greener." Families stopped to read it, children running their fingers over the carved letters before darting off to play. Every person who paused there carried a piece of the message forward, quietly reminded that the smallest acts could leave the largest roots. Keanu paused for a moment, watching a group of workers trimming shrubs along the sidewalk. Their green shirts bore the familiar logo of the Green Hands Initiative. The men worked efficiently, sharing jokes as they swept, trimmed, and watered. They didn't look for recognition. They didn't seek applause. Yet they were the reason the city looked alive. He felt something deep and grounding stir within him. It wasn't pride. It was gratitude, the realization that real strength lived in the invisible, in the people who showed up every day to build beauty for others. His thoughts turned to Luis again. He saw him kneeling near a flower bed, tightening a hose connection, his face calm and content. The world now saw him as a symbol of humility, but to Keanu, he was something simpler, a friend, a reminder of how one gesture could redefine humanity's idea of worth. Nearby, Maria was helping a group of young students with a planting lesson. She held a small book in her hands, her award-winning essay tucked inside. Her voice carried clearly as she read a line from it aloud. "Work is love made visible," she said. The children nodded thoughtfully before digging their hands into the soil. Luis looked up, smiling at her. "She's her mother's daughter," he said softly, as if speaking to the trees. Keanu turned to him. "And your legacy," he added. The sun began to dip behind the skyline, bathing everything in a warm, amber glow. The park lights flickered on, glowing gently against the dusky sky. Birds darted across the fading horizon, their wings catching the last light. Keanu stopped at the edge of the park, looking back one final time. The garden stretched, out before him green, vibrant, and alive. Every path, every leaf, every blossom told a story of kindness made tangible. He thought of the beginning, a dusty driveway, a cruel laugh, a man too proud to look up, and then a jug of water, a single moment that turned into something far greater than any of them could have imagined. His voice, low and steady, echoed his reflection. Next time you pass someone working under the sun, remember, they're building the world you live in. The camera would fade, but the image lingered. Luis, standing in the park with a hose in his hand, water misting over the trees as Maria waved goodbye to the children. The aerial view rose slowly, capturing the entire park in one sweeping shot. The trees shimmered like emeralds in the golden light, each one a living reminder of what respect and compassion could plant. Keanu's voice continued, gentle and firm. Fame fades. Kindness doesn't. It keeps growing, just like these trees. Then the screen turned black, leaving only the final words, a call to action. If you believe every worker deserves respect, share this story and tell us who in your life has inspired you through simple, honest work.